The architecture of the Vance estate had a way of swallowed up the night, its massive limestone walls and towering vaulted ceilings creating a fortress of isolation that felt entirely disconnected from the ordinary world. Nestled deep within an exclusive, heavily forested enclave, the mansion was a living testament to refined wealth and meticulous design. For Leo, a 23-year-old college student, the sprawling house had become a second home over the last 5 years. His friendship with Ethan, the only son of the Vance family, was built on a foundation of absolute loyalty and brotherhood. They had shared dorm rooms, late-night study sessions, and the reckless ambitions of youth. Because of how close they were, Leo was a frequent fixture at the estate, often staying over in the grand guest wing whenever university life became too suffocating or when project deadlines demanded long, uninterrupted hours of collaboration. He knew the creak of the floorboards, the layout of the shadowed corridors, and the heavy, silent history that seemed to linger in every polished mahogany corner. But the true center of gravity within that massive house was not Ethan. It was his mother, Mrs. Victoria Vance. At 45, Victoria was a woman of striking, hypnotic elegance. As one of the city's most celebrated and elite interior designers, she moved through life with a curated, effortless grace, her presence commanding immediate respect in any room she entered. She possessed a rare, timeless beauty, with sharp, intelligent dark eyes that seemed capable of reading a person's innermost thoughts, and a soft, low voice that carried the weight of absolute authority. Yet, despite her formidable public persona, Victoria had always treated Leo with a strange, intense kindness that he could never quite decipher. It wasn't the casual, distant politeness a wealthy parent usually offered her son's friends. It was a focused, hyper-aware attention. She would often linger in the kitchen to talk to him long after Ethan had gone to bed, asking about his ambitions, his principles, and his view of the world with an intensity that always left Leo's heart beating a fraction faster. She looked at him not as a boy, but as a man, a mature, grounded equal in a house filled with superficial wealth and old family ghosts. Leo had spent years burying a deep, forbidden admiration for her, a silent infatuation that he guarded fiercely, knowing that even a single misplaced glance could destroy his friendship with Ethan and banish him from the sanctuary of their lives. The fragile equilibrium of that dynamic was pushed to a breaking point on a dark, suffocating weekend in late autumn. Ethan had left the estate early Friday morning for an extended university trip to the coast, leaving the sprawling mansion entirely empty save for his mother and the skeletal staff that departed before dusk. A historic storm had been building along the horizon all afternoon, and by midnight, the weather had descended upon the valley with an absolute, apocalyptic fury. Torrential rain lashed against the grand leaded glass windows like a relentless sequence of gunfire, while savage gusts of wind howled through the ancient oak trees surrounding the perimeter. Leo had volunteered to stay behind at the house, offering to keep an eye on the estate's vulnerable drainage systems and secure the heavy courtyard gates against the tempest. It was an excuse, a subconscious desire to be near the house, to be an anchor in the storm, though he repeatedly told himself he was simply doing a favor for his best friend. As the clock crept past 2 in the morning, the violent crack of a nearby lightning strike shook the very foundations of the mansion. A second later, the low, ambient hum of the heating grid died completely, and the entire estate was plunged into a dense, suffocating pitch darkness. The automated backup generators failed to kick in, leaving the vast interior silent save for the roaring thrum of the rain outside. Leo, who had been tossing and turning in the guest wing, swung his legs out of bed, grabbing a heavy metal tactical flashlight from his nightstand. He rolled up his sleeves, clicked the beam of light into the dark hallway, and began a slow, methodical sweep of the upper levels to ensure the storm hadn't breached the skylights. The air in the corridors was freezing, thick with the scent of ozone and old wood. Leo navigated the labyrinthine hallway, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the heavy shadows, casting long, monstrous distortions across the portraits of Vance's ancestors lining the walls. As he rounded the corner leading toward the grand central staircase, the beam of his light caught a sudden flash of silk. Leo lowered the flashlight instantly, his breath catching in his throat. Standing at the top of the stairs, illuminated only by the intermittent, violet flashes of lightning that pierced the grand skylight above, was Victoria. She looked entirely different from the impeccably tailored, untouchable woman she was during the day. She was wrapped in a long, dark emerald silk robe that clung elegantly to her frame, her long silver-streaked hair falling loosely over her shoulders in soft, chaotic waves. Her face was pale, her sharp eyes wide and dark with an intense, internal conflict that looked dangerously close to panic. She didn't retreat when she saw him. Instead, she took 3 deliberate, hurried steps forward, completely blocking Leo's path in the narrow corridor. The scent of her perfume, a delicate, intoxicating blend of dark amber and midnight jasmine, washed over him in the dark, erasing the cold chill of the air. She reached out, her fingers brushing against his bare forearm. Her skin was freezing, trembling with a violent, electric tension that sent a shockwave straight to Leo's core. "Leo," she whispered, her voice a ragged, desperate breath that sounded completely stripped of her usual maternal composure. Her dark eyes bored into his with a raw, terrifying vulnerability that made it impossible for him to look away. "Thank God you're still awake. I need you to look at something in my private study right now. But you must promise me, Leo, you must swear to me on your life, that you will never, ever tell my son about what you are about to see tonight." The raw desperation in her tone sent a massive spike of adrenaline through Leo's veins. The sheer proximity of her, the intense grip of her fingers on his arm, and the weight of the secret she was already imposing between him and his best friend made his heart hammer violently against his ribs. He looked down at her pale, beautiful face, seeing the cracks in her armor, and the protective, forbidden instinct that had been dormant inside him for years instantly locked into place. He nodded slowly, his voice dropping into a deep, steady register. "I promise, Victoria. I won't say a word to Ethan. Lead the way." Victoria let out a long, shuddering breath, her fingers sliding down his arm to briefly press against his hand before she turned and led him through the pitch-black corridor toward the heavy, reinforced mahogany door of her private study. She unlocked it with a small brass key she had been clutching in her palm, pushing the door open and leading him into a room that smelled of premium leather, aged paper, and old wood smoke. She closed the door firmly behind them, locking the latch, ensuring they were entirely isolated from the rest of the world. She walked over to her large executive desk, lit a single amber candle that cast a low, flickering glow across the room, and reached into a hidden compartment behind a row of built-in bookshelves. She pulled out a thick, legal-sized dossier bound in tattered black leather and threw it onto the desk in front of Leo. "Open it," she commanded softly, her voice trembling as she leaned against the edge of the desk, her eyes fixed on his face. Leo set his flashlight down, the amber candlelight flickering across his features as he opened the folder. As his eyes scanned the official medical documents, genomic sequences, and signed legal declarations, the world around him seemed to tilt on its axis. The primary document was a highly confidential, 30-year-old paternity registry and medical file. As he read the names and the DNA markers, the truth hit him like a physical blow. Ethan's late father, the legendary patriarch Arthur Vance, who had built the family's multinational logistics empire, was not Ethan's biological father. Ethan was the product of a brief, tragic romance Victoria had experienced during her youth with a brilliant but impoverished artist before she was forced into an arranged marriage with Arthur to save her own family's failing textile business. Arthur had known the truth, and to protect the Vance lineage and prevent a catastrophic public scandal that would dissolve their corporate mergers, he had legally buried the documentation, raising Ethan as his own son under a strict, ironclad non-disclosure trust. Leo dropped the papers back onto the desk, his mind racing, his eyes flying up to look at Victoria, who was watching him with a look of pure, agonizing vulnerability. "But if Arthur buried this, why is it here now?" Leo asked, his voice low and intense. "Why are you showing me this tonight?" "Because Arthur's younger brother, Julian Vance, found the original unredacted files in a secondary offshore safety deposit box last month," Victoria explained, her voice cracking with a bitter, dangerous resentment as she took a step closer to Leo, the distance between them shrinking until he could feel the radiant warmth of her breath. "Julian is a corrupt, ruthless corporate lawyer who has spent his entire life living in his brother's shadow. He hates me, and he hates Ethan. He has overleveraged his own legal firm into tens of millions of dollars of toxic debt, and he is using these documents to systematically blackmail me. He is demanding a $40 million cash injection from my Interior Design Corporation's primary reserve vaults by Monday morning. If I don't transfer the funds, he is going to leak these paternity files to the International Board of Directors and the media. She reached out, her hands gently grabbing Leo's forearms, her gaze locking onto his with a fierce, unbreakable intensity that made the air in his throat catch. If he leaks this, Leo, it won't just ruin my business. It will completely destroy Ethan. You know how much Ethan idolized his father. You know how fragile his sense of identity is after Arthur's passing. It would fracture his mind, strip him of his legal inheritance, and leave him with absolutely nothing. I can't let that happen. I would burn my own life to the ground before I let Julian destroy my son. Leo swallowed hard, the psychological stakes of the situation settling heavily onto his shoulders. He looked down at her hands on his arms, feeling the profound trust she was placing in him, a trust she had denied to her own flesh and blood. But why me, Victoria? He asked softly, looking directly into her dark, searching eyes. You have access to the best private security firms and corporate fixers in the city. Why bring a 23-year-old college student into a war with a ruthless corporate lawyer? Because those corporate fixers can be bought, Victoria whispered, her voice dropping into an incredibly intimate, emotionally charged register that made the hair on Leo's arms stand up. She stepped even closer, her eyes dropping to his lips for a fraction of a second before snapping back to his gaze, her posture carrying a raw, forbidden attraction that they had both ignored for years but could no longer deny in the absolute isolation of the storm. I chose you, Leo, because I don't need a hired gun. I need someone who truly loves Ethan enough to protect him, and someone mature enough to handle the darkness of this family without flinching. But more than that. I chose you because I have watched you for 5 years, Leo. I have seen your unyielding loyalty, your brilliant mind, and the protective, quiet strength you carry inside you. In a world full of superficial, corrupt men like Julian, you are the only man I truly trust. I have admired you for a very long time, Leo. Far longer than I should have. The confession hung in the warm, candlelit air of the study like a brilliant, dangerous lightning strike. The unspoken tension that had lingered between them for years, the stolen glances across dinner tables, the lingering touches of greeting, the silent, mutual awareness of an attraction that defied their age gap and social boundaries, finally exploded into the open. Leo felt a profound, intoxicating wave of desire crash through his loyalty, a primal urge to reach out, wrap his arms around her waist, and claim the stunning woman standing inches from him. But the cold, hard reality of the blackmail threat pulled him back from the precipice. He couldn't afford to lose control. He had to be the protector she believed he was. He placed his large hands gently over hers, his grip firm, steady, and filled with an absolute, reassuming strength. We are going to destroy him, Victoria, Leo said, his voice ringing with a cold, calculated determination that made Victoria's eyes shine with a sudden, fierce hope. Julian thinks he has a perfect trap because he assumes you are alone and terrified. He doesn't know I'm in this room. My degree in financial analytics and cyberforensics isn't just for a diploma. If Julian has been threatening you, he has been using encrypted communication relays and secondary digital legal contracts to shield his extortion. If we can intercept his data connection during the scheduled exchange, we can implement a reciprocal legal blind. We can trap him using his own leverage. Over the next 3 hours, while the storm raged outside, rattling the heavy wooden shutters of the study, Leo and Victoria worked in a feverish, synchronized harmony that completely redefined their relationship. Sitting side by side at the large desk, their shoulders brushing, their hands occasionally interlocking as they reviewed Julian's blackmail demands, they formulated a high-stakes counter-strategy. Leo used his laptop, linked to a secure, independent cellular hotspot, to run a deep-dive forensic audit on Julian Vance's legal firm. Within hours, his analytical mind uncovered the fatal flaw in the blackmailer's armor. Julian hadn't just discovered the paternity files, He had used his position as the family's primary estate lawyer to covertly embezzle $8 million from the Vance family's charitable trust foundations over the last fiscal year to cover his own trading losses. He was using the blackmail not just for greed, but to cover up a felony that would send him to a state penitentiary for the rest of his life if revealed to the federal authorities. The exchange was scheduled for Sunday evening at 7 o'clock, inside the grand, private art gallery that Victoria owned in the city's historic arts district. Julian had demanded that Victoria arrive alone with the signed corporate asset transfer documentation. But as the storm cleared on Sunday morning, leaving the valley washed in a crisp, cold sunlight, the architecture of the countertrap was fully operational. Leo spent the afternoon installing a series of high-definition, encrypted microcameras and localized cellular data intercept routers throughout the gallery space, creating a digital dragnet that would capture every syllable and every file transmission that occurred within the room. By 6:30 that evening, the Grand Gallery was a masterclass in tension, its polished concrete floors and minimalist white walls casting long, clinical shadows under the dim track lighting. Victoria stood in the center of the main room, dressed in an impeccably tailored, razor-sharp black designer suit, her silver-streaked hair pinned back in a flawless, imposing style. On the surface, she looked like the untouchable, powerful CEO the public feared. But Leo, hidden behind a false drywall partition in the gallery's private administrative office, watching her through the security monitor feed, could see the subtle, rhythmic trembling of her fingers as she adjusted the collar of her jacket. His heart ached for her, his protective instincts burning with an intense, quiet fury as the scheduled hour arrived. At exactly 7 o'clock, the heavy glass front doors of the gallery clicked open. Stepping into the room was Julian Vance. At 50, Julian was a man who exuded a sharp, predatory arrogance. Dressed in an expensive bespoke suit, carrying a sleek leather briefcase, his face was contorted into a smug, triumphant smirk that practically screamed of unbridled entitlement. He walked down the central aisle of the gallery, his polished leather shoes echoing loudly in the silent space, stopping just 3 feet from Victoria. "Good evening, Victoria," Julian announced, his voice carrying a cruel, patronizing amusement that made Leo's jaw clench in the dark office. "You look radiant for a woman whose entire empire is about to dissolve. I hope you brought the signed asset transfer paperwork. The International Clearing House opens its midnight cycle in a few hours, and I have a long list of creditors waiting for my call." Victoria didn't flinch. She kept her eyes fixed on his face, her voice cool, calm, and absolute. "The paperwork is ready, Julian. But before I authorize a $40 million corporate depletion, I want a definitive guarantee. I want the original physical ledger and the encryption keys to the offshore server holding the genomic data. I want an absolute assurance that this is the end of your extortion." Julian let out a loud, mocking laugh, taking a step closer, invading her personal space with a total, dismissive disregard. "Guarantee? You are in no position to demand guarantees from me, you arrogant textbook designer. You will hand over the documentation because if you don't, your precious son discovers he is a nameless bastard by morning, and your corporate board strips you of your chairmanship before the opening bell. I hold all the cards, Victoria. You are completely alone, and you will do exactly what I tell you to do." He reached into his jacket, pulling out a sleek digital tablet to initiate the secure document upload. But before his fingers could brush the interface, the heavy wooden security door of the administrative office clicked open, and Leo stepped out into the main gallery hall. "She is not alone, Julian," Leo said, his voice deep, resonant, and carrying a terrifying, serene calm that shattered the silence of the room like a sonic boom. Julian spun around on his heel, his smirk freezing instantly as he saw the 23-year-old college student walking slowly down the gallery aisle, his posture straight, his eyes like 2 chips of broken ice. Julian's face contorted into a look of absolute, aristocratic fury. "Who the hell are you?" he snapped, gesturing wildly with his hand. "This is a private corporate meeting. Get this boy out of my sight, Victoria, or I leak the files right now." "He's not leaving, Julian," Victoria said softly, a cold, dark smile finally touching the corners of her lips as she stepped up to stand directly next to Leo, their shoulders aligning in a seamless, powerful front of absolute unity. Leo stopped just 2 feet from the corrupt lawyer, looking down at him with an expression of total, clinical indifference. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his smartphone, and tapped a single button, activating a real-time, encrypted data stream mirror on the grand digital projection screen mounted on the gallery's central wall. The screen flared to life, displaying a massive, comprehensive legal indictment dossier, complete with verified bank routing numbers, falsified balance sheets, and a series of high-level forensic audit logs tracking the embezzlement of $8 million from the Vance family's charitable trust foundations. At the very top of the document was a live, pulsing data link labeled Federal Financial Crimes Bureau Registry. "Let's talk about your cards, Julian," Leo said, his voice a low, terrifying whisper that cut through the lawyer's soul. "At exactly 6:55, my localized routers intercepted your tablet's automatic data handshake with your offshore server. The encryption keys you used to secure the paternity files have already been cracked and mirrored onto an independent, secure legal vault managed by a Tier 1 firm outside your sphere of influence. But more importantly, while you were busy playing the part of a criminal mastermind, I finalized the forensic tracking on your corporate trust accounts." Julian's face completely drained of all color, leaving his skin a sickly, ash-gray hue under the track lighting. His knees trembled slightly, his arrogant posture collapsing into a state of visible panic as he stared at the financial data on the wall. What is this?" he stammered, his voice cracking violently. "This is illegal surveillance. You can't use this against me." "I'm not using it against you, Julian," Leo replied, his gaze unyielding. "The federal authorities are already using it. The moment you walked through those glass doors, an automated, anonymous whistleblower packet containing the complete data logs of your $8 million corporate embezzlement was uploaded to the state prosecutor's secure server. If you press the confirmation button on your tablet, or if a single syllable of Ethan's paternity data is ever leaked to the public, a secondary automated trigger will authorize the release of the unredacted forensic keys to every major news outlet in the state. By morning, you won't be a wealthy corporate lawyer holding an inheritance hostage. You will be a bankrupt, publicly ruined felon facing 30 years in a maximum security penitentiary." Julian staggered backward, his breathing shallow and ragged as he looked from the grand screen back to Leo's calm, executioner-like face. He looked at Victoria, seeing the absolute, icy triumph in her eyes, and he realized with a sudden, crushing finality that the blind, terrified victim he thought he was exploiting had turned into an invincible, lethal trap. His entire leverage had been completely annihilated in a matter of minutes by a young man he hadn't even factored into his calculations. You ruined me," Julian whispered, his face twisting into a desperate, feral look of defeat as he gripped his leather briefcase tightly, slowly backing away toward the gallery exit. "The doors are open, Julian," Victoria said, her voice ringing with an absolute, majestic finality that echoed off the white walls. "Take your briefcase, take your debt, and disappear from my family's sight. If I ever see your face near my son, or near my corporation again, Leo will press the button. Now, get out." Without a single word of retaliation, his pride completely broken and his empire in absolute ruin, Julian Vance turned on his heel and scrambled out of the grand gallery, his frantic footsteps fading down the rainy city street like a pathetic echo of a past that could never threaten them again. The heavy glass doors clicked shut, and an absolute, beautiful silence descended upon the grand gallery hall. The high-stakes chess match was over. The counter-trap had executed with absolute, flawless precision, and the Vance family legacy was permanently secure. Leo let out a long, slow breath, his shoulders finally relaxing as the intense rush of adrenaline began to recede. He turned around to check on Victoria, but before he could utter a single syllable of reassurance, she closed the remaining distance between them. She reached up, her hands wrapping tightly around his neck, her face buried in his chest as she held him with a desperate, overwhelming intensity. She was trembling, the final remnants of the terror and the stress of the past month dissolving against the steady, warm reality of his presence. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice thick with tears as she looked up at him, her dark eyes shining with a profound, raw emotion that went entirely beyond gratitude. "Thank you for saving my son, Leo. Thank you for saving me." Leo looked down at her beautiful, radiant face, his hands instinctively settling around her waist, pulling her close against his frame. The forbidden attraction that they had struggled to contain during the storm was no longer a secret, no longer a dangerous shadow to be feared. In the aftermath of their victory, the age gap, the social boundaries, and the rules of the past felt entirely insignificant compared to the absolute, unbreakable bond they had forged in the fire of their shared battle. "I will always protect you, Victoria," Leo whispered, his voice deep, honest, and filled with an unshakable devotion as he leaned down, closing the final distance between them. Their lips met in a passionate, deeply intense, and intensely emotional kiss that sealed their new reality. It was a kiss that carried the weight of years of silent admiration, the electric tension of the stormy night in the study, and the profound, heartwarming certainty of a future where they no longer had to pretend. They knew that the road ahead would be complex, that they would have to continue to guard the secret from Ethan to protect his peace of mind, and navigate the delicate architecture of their changing family dynamic. But as they stood together in the quiet, dim light of the gallery, wrapped in each other's arms, Leo knew that he was no longer just a college student living in the shadows of an elite family. He was the anchor of the Vance legacy, the protector of the woman he loved, and a man who had successfully rewritten his own destiny in the heart of the storm.